I like me, I'd buy me a beer. And I know that might sound strange, but I'm going to talk about how this story and that concept ties in with property, and how you can, by using this concept, and I'll tell a story about it a bit later, how you can speed up the quality of your learning when it comes to property by using this concept. And it's something that I've found over the years has really helped me. And if you start employing it, it'll help you as well. What does buying a beer and property have in common? Both make you feel great. One probably makes you feel a bit more proud of yourself than the other, especially if you've had too many. That's buying properties, not having beers. Anyway, what we're going to talk about is how you can build your wisdom, increase your knowledge, and therefore speed up your buying journey. And I'm going to sort of talk about a little story, as I say, and that is starts with a quote, which I heard on a podcast with a guy called Dry Creek Dwayne recently, and that is, I like me, I'd buy me a beer. So this guy, you may or may not have seen him online. He's been doing the rounds doing podcasts, and he's basically a cowboy from Wyoming, I think. He's 60 odd and sits on his balcony in his rocking chair, smoking a cigar, drinking a glass of whiskey, and talking about his life lessons that he's learned over the time of doing that through dealing with animals, being a family man, all of that sort of stuff. And it sort of got me thinking that actually, the wisdom you need to be able to build a portfolio, to be able to get better at your job, to be able to achieve any goal you're trying to achieve, can be found all around you, such as a podcast with a cowboy from Wyoming. And it may seem like there's not a lot of similarities between the two. And there's probably not in terms of, obviously, the job. We're property investors, he's wrangling horses, but the knowledge and the lessons you learn along the way can be applied across the board. And that sort of crystallized in my head a thought that I think I've unconsciously thought for a while, which is that, the wisdom you need is all around you. And Malcolm Gladwell says it in his book, 10,000 Hours, that it takes 10,000 hours of doing anything to become a master in that thing. So do you really need to do those 10,000 hours? Do you really need to spend 10,000 hours looking at potential properties, doing research on locations, reading books, or can you supercharge that and speed it up by actually trying to gain wisdom from other people? And I think, yes, you can. And that's one of the reasons I love doing what I do so much, which is getting to speak to expats from all over the world and sort of listening to their stories. Because although, property specifically, I work in property, I've got my own portfolio, I know how it's done, everyone has a lesson or a story they can tell you. I speak to people that have had a bad experience of property. Okay, well, what happened there? Why did you buy? Why did you buy in that location? What sort of tenant did you get? And you can start learning from their good experiences or their bad experiences. And I think often, as most of us know, you can learn more from the bad ones. So sitting down with people, is a great opportunity to speak to them and find out about their experiences. And you can do this yourself. You can speak to friends and family about their experiences. Don't necessarily listen to their advice because they're not experts, but you can listen to their stories and gain insight and information and data points that you can use yourself. Okay, this person had a great experience. Their property went up £50,000 in 5 years. Okay, why is that? Where did they buy? What was driving that growth? Was it lucky, or were there dots that you could join to string that together to see why it performed so well? And then could you take that and use it yourself if you think about it? So for example, any of you that listen to the podcast, the most recent one, you will know that I spoke with a lady called Julie Talbot, who is a full-time nomad, not even a digital nomad. Her husband and her children full-time travel the world. And the way she's been able to do that is by building a portfolio that generates her income so that she can do that. I've never even thought about that, how you would do it, how you would put it together, how you would manage your time, how you would source these deals when you're in countries that might not have great internet, or you might have to put VPNs on. And so there's lessons to be learned there, for all of us, myself included. And that was something that sort of watching that Dry Creek, tongue twister. You try say it, Dry Creek Dwayne podcast sort of made me make the link between people and their experiences and wisdom and knowledge. So I'll jump into some of the things now that I try and do and that have helped me in terms of building my portfolio, in terms of gathering information, finding data points, looking at trends, through speaking to people and wisdom and different avenues of information, sources of media, using all of that in different countries, not just the UK, to create a holistic picture of property and then speed up that 10,000 hours learning process. The answer is, in reality, if you have your eyes open, the answers are literally all around you in everything you see. You've got so much information online now for free that you don't even need to spend that much money to access it. This podcast, there are other podcasts, believe it or not, on property, maybe not as good as this one, but there are others out there. Go and listen to them. Go and find some YouTube channels. If you use Instagram, have a look at some Instagram channels. Go and buy some books. Even walking down the street can give you knowledge about property. Especially if you back that up with looking at local house prices. Why is this area performing better? Is it because there is a train stop here, or there's a train stop coming in, or there's some investment in infrastructure, or is it because there's good employers nearby? So you can find this information everywhere around you. For example, and I know this might be hard to do because we're all busy and we've got family and we've got full-time jobs that aren't property, and we're thinking about, what we're going to have to go and do, playing football this weekend or paddle, or when we've got to pick our kids up, whatever it may be. But when you're watching the news, for example, if you read the news, or if you don't listen to the news because it's always depressing, anyway you pick up information, start looking at it through the lens of, okay, what impact would this have on property prices, investor sentiment, all of that sort of stuff. Recently Rachel Reeves is talking about an extra tax on property rental income. Well, what is the impact of that going to be on the market? Probably the fact that it's going to scare a lot of people off. Probably some people are going to try and start selling properties, which might cause downward pressure on the market. For me, I'm always an optimist with property. I believe that it's probably a buying opportunity because as investors exit the market, the supply of rental properties go down, so the pressure on the rental market goes up, which can only be a good thing for those investors that stick with it and stick it out. And again, if you've got the time, but with property, if you want to do it well, you do need to commit some time to it. Don't just look at the UK. We live in a global marketplace, especially as expats, we live all over, and you can buy property and look at markets anywhere, and you'll start seeing the same sort of themes emerge. Up on the whiteboard there behind me earlier, we had the PI framework, which is population, infrastructure, employment, and that's a really good way to analyse a location from an investment perspective. Does it have a growing population or a large population? Is the population falling? What will the impact of that be on property prices and rental demand? Obviously, a growing population, it's going to increase that. The example there was Manchester. Manchester has a 51% student retention rate, and according to a quick search online, has over 100,000 students. So that means you've got 51,000 students each year, or let's say that's divided up between first, second and third year, or even post-grad, so 25,000 students each year graduating. Half of those are looking for places to live, and there'll be places to rent, because when you leave university you don't necessarily have the capital behind you to buy. So population, what does that mean? Infrastructure, what's the infrastructure like? When I used to go down to Papua New Guinea, the roads were rubbish and you couldn't get anywhere, so it made it difficult for people to do business, and therefore property prices were never that exciting in terms of growth. Whereas somewhere like Manchester, you've got the £4 billion Victoria North development project going on, you've got the tram, you've got train lines connecting to other major cities, easy motorway access. It makes it easy for the population to move around to the E, which is the employment. And when we look at employment, what do we mean? Are there good quality large employers there that are going to pull people to that area to work? What's the impact of that? More people coming in for work, more pressure on rental demand, good for property investors. So that's a basic framework, but the point I was getting to there is the fact that that applies in every country as far as I'm aware. I was reading an article this morning about the top 10 hotspots to buy in Australia, and it's dominated, or number one is inner city Brisbane, and the main driver for that is the 2032 Olympics and the amount of infrastructure investment that's going into the city because of that, and that's driving up property prices. They call it the Olympic corridor in Brisbane, and it's the same if you look at Sydney. They're building a new airport out west. Property prices there are already going up in anticipation of that. It's the same in Dubai. If you look at Dubai real estate agents, the Al Maktoum airport, which I think is going to be one of the biggest airports in the world. Again, property prices are going up there and people are buying there, even though there's not that much there anymore, because it's going to bring jobs, it's going to bring infrastructure, it's going to bring population of people that want to be near an airport. So these are all concepts you can use across the board. You can learn about property and gain wisdom when you're on holiday, as another example. I know you're probably not thinking about property when you're on holiday, but if you stay in an Airbnb or if you stay in a popular tourist location, chances are there are a lot of Airbnbs. Okay, well, how much does it cost per night to rent one of those? How much would it cost to buy one? Therefore, what's the yield? Does it give a good yield? You can do that every time you go away, and you can start learning about different markets and the different dynamics. For example, Phuket, a strong and growing investment property market for a lot of the reasons we just mentioned, the population, infrastructure and employment. Post-COVID, they've got heaps of flights from all over the world coming in, great infrastructure, great healthcare, great schooling. Employment, I'd say not so much in Phuket, it's probably more people that are using the infrastructure to fly to Hong Kong or Singapore, and then also the tourism. But the point is, you can learn about property and property markets all the time through doing these sorts of things. Obvious ones would be books, as I mentioned earlier, listening to podcasts. But when you're doing these things, don't just take what is being said for granted or that it's factually correct and spot on. Same with me, don't just take what I'm saying and think, okay, that must be right, I'm going to do that. Look at it through your own lens and apply it to your own strategy. And that is actually what's on the board there. Is the 4 things for creating your own strategy would be: define what you're trying to achieve. Is that income? Is it retirement income? Income now? Do you want to quit your job? Is it capital growth? Maybe you don't want the income, you just want to build your pot. So define what you're trying to do. Always start small. That's number 2 with the goal setting. Yes, have a big, audacious goal, but you need to break it down into baby steps. You know, if you're going to go and start training for a marathon, unless you are pretty hardcore, you don't go straight into doing a marathon. You do a 5K, a 10K, with the marathon as the end goal, but with these smaller goals ticked off across the way. So start small, have a big goal, but have smaller ones to work towards. Thirdly would be your time frames. You know, so what time frame you need to define, what time frame you're trying to achieve these goals by. Is it, okay, I want to retire in 10 years, therefore 10-year time frame? Is it as soon as possible? Is it for me, it's a long-term play, and I'm looking at it at 20, 25 years. Personally, I think with property, because of the higher sunk costs now, such as stamp duty, actually you need to be looking at least a 5-year play in terms of holding a property. And then lastly, the 4th bit, I've put there numbers, but I would change that maybe to resources. So look at your savings ability, look at what you've got cash in the bank wise, look at how quickly you can save, add to that existing deposit, and then with all those different things, plus talking about resources, lay over the top of that your knowledge, your time resource, and then you'll start having a strategy appear in front of you. You know, so for example, you've got £50,000 in the bank, or you will have when you've reached your savings goals in a year, and you want to create good growth but also achieve a good yield. Okay, well, where does those things that will allow you to buy at £200,000 because of 25% deposit, £50,000, no costs for now, just to keep it simple, you're looking at a £200,000 property. So in reality, obviously not the south, southeast, you're probably going to be looking at the Midlands and further north. Northeast, northwest, those would be places such as Liverpool and Manchester. But if your goal is growth and income, then where is going to have the highest growth over the next 5 years? Savills are saying it's the northwest, 31%. This is all information I'm getting from reading and keeping an open mind and looking for wisdom where I can find it. And what do we also know? That Liverpool and Manchester are some of the highest yielding larger cities in the UK. So all of a sudden, you've got a bit of a roadmap in front of you, okay? With these resources, this time frame and these goals, these are the sorts of places I should be buying. If you've got more cash and your goal is purely yield driven, for example, then you might look at a HMO, higher yielding, usually higher cost to get into because they're a bit more expensive. But again, depending on where you buy. One of my favorite approaches when I'm trying to find out about anything is just to go and buy a couple of books on it. I like having lots of books in the house and then just work your way through those books and pick out the pearls of wisdom you need. You know, so that could be, as I say, anywhere. I'm reading a lot about Australia at the moment because I think it's a similar sort of market to the UK, but slightly different because it's very capital appreciation driven as opposed to yield. I didn't know much about it, so I picked up a book and I've started reading about it. So what is the moral of this story or this podcast? And I know it's a very loose connection between Dry Creek Dwayne and property, and I know it's probably because I Buy Me a Beer is a good punchy headline, but what is the point? The point is that the information we need is all around us. It might be if you're just starting out, property is scary, there's a lot of things to consider, mortgages, tax, buying locations, your goals, regulations, etc., what's going on in the economy. But by breaking it down and seeking wisdom around you, you can start gathering the tools you need to get better at it and to start doing it well. It's in the same way that if I had a new goal I was trying to achieve from a sporting perspective or a work perspective and I didn't know where to start, I would start looking for the wisdom and information around me. So, moral of the story, keep an open mind, keep your eyes open, and a lot of the information you need to speed up that 10,000 hours to become a master will reveal itself to you. Because what happens when you start looking for yellow cars? You start seeing yellow cars. So what happens when you start looking for property information, good quality information? You'll start finding it. If you made it all the way through to the end, thanks very much for listening. We'll see you next week.